Damien Hargrove had built his empire the way a surgeon performs open-heart surgery with absolute precision. Zero emotion. And the full understanding that one wrong move ends everything. At 41, he sat at the top of a criminal hierarchy that stretched from the port warehouses of South Baltimore to a constellation of shell corporations registered across 4 continents. His legitimate face was Hargrove Atlantic Freight, a mid-sized logistics company whose fleet of unmarked refrigerated trucks crossed state lines every 48 hours. His real business moved pharmaceutical-grade narcotics, military surplus weapons, and quantities of cash so large they had to be weighed rather than counted. He lived in a restored federal-style manor house on 12 fenced acres outside Richmond, Virginia. 42 rooms, a private shooting range behind the east wing, a basement server room that his tech team called the Vault, and a perimeter security system that had cost more than most people's retirement funds. His day car was a charcoal-gray Cadillac CT6, with reinforced door panels and run-flat tires. His weekend car was a British racing green Bentley Continental GT that he rarely drove because it attracted attention he didn't need. Damien trusted systems. He trusted data. He trusted the cold architecture of carefully designed plans. He had never, in his adult life, trusted a person completely. Until Sabrina Voss walked into his world 18 months ago at a private auction for a decommissioned Navy vessel, repurposed as a floating research lab. She had outbid him on it. He had been so stunned by the audacity that he had sent a bottle of 1,996 Krug Clos du Mesnil to her table. She had sent it back with a note that read, "I prefer to earn my celebrations." He was finished. Completely. Catastrophically finished. Sabrina was 34. The daughter of a retired federal judge. A woman whose face appeared in glossy magazines, photographed at museum, fundraisers, and government charity dinners. She had chestnut hair, dark, amber eyes, and the kind of composed, intelligent beauty that didn't announce itself but simply existed, quietly devastating. She wore things like a tailored ivory pantsuit or a deep navy wrap dress and looked equally at home in both. She was the sort of woman who made powerful men nervous because she was never visibly impressed by power. Damien had proposed to her 7 months ago with a cushion-cut Asher diamond from a private estate sale in Antwerp, 4 carats. Internally flawless, mounted on a platinum band with a channel of smaller stones. She had studied the ring for a long moment, then looked up at him and said, "Are you sure about this?" As if she were the one doing him the favor. He had never wanted anything more in his life, but the doubt had crept in, slowly, like water, finding cracks in concrete 3 weeks ago. He had noticed the way Sabrina's energy changed when he discussed money. Not greed. Exactly something more controlled than that. A subtle sharpening of attention. The way she asked questions about his offshore structures that were just a half step too specific for casual interest. The way. She had left a browser tab open on a laptop, showing an article about asset forfeiture and spousal rights under federal indictment law. She had closed it the moment she noticed him looking. Maybe it was nothing. But Damien Hargrove had not survived this long by ignoring his instincts. He needed to know. It took him 3 weeks to engineer the test. He worked through his financial architect in Nassau, a man named Quentin, who had been moving invisible money for 12 years without a single error. Quentin temporarily restructured Damien's entire liquid position, $94 million, into a multi-layered blind trust registered through a Liechtenstein holding company. The assets were untouched. They were simply unreachable by normal means. hidden behind layers of corporate identity that even Damien's own banking contacts couldn't immediately penetrate. He had his IT security chief manipulate the account dashboards on his personal devices to reflect catastrophic negative balances. He arranged for a theatrical and entirely staged federal surveillance operation on his secondary freight depot in northern Maryland. The agents were retired military contractors who owed him favors, and the whole thing lasted 40 minutes before being quietly stood down. It looked exactly like the beginning of a major federal case, and then he came home. It was a Thursday evening in late October. The sky over Richmond had the bruised purple color of incoming rain. Damien walked into the manor through the main entrance without calling ahead, which he almost never did. His jacket was unbuttoned, his tie pulled loose, his face arranged into an expression he had practiced in the car mirror, the entire drive back hollowed out. Stunned. Unmade. Sabrina was in the front sitting room. She had changed into a silk loungewear, set the color of dark plum, and she was reading a hardcover biography of a Cold War diplomat with one leg tucked underneath her. A glass of Sancerre sat on the mahogany side table. The brass floor lamp threw warm amber light across her face. She looked up. Her expression shifted immediately concern, or something that wore its clothes. "You're early," she said, "and you look terrible." Damien dropped his jacket on the armchair across from her and sat heavily on the leather sofa. He pressed his palms against his eyes for a long moment. "I need to tell you something," he said, "and I need you to stay calm." Sabrina closed her book, set it precisely on the table beside her wine glass, folded her hands in her lap. "Tell me." Damien looked at her. The government executed a seizure order against the company's primary accounts this morning. Federal. Asset forfeiture. They froze everything: the logistics accounts, the holding structures, the investment portfolio, all of it. He exhaled. Goldman Sachs severed the advisory relationship this afternoon by email. I found out at 4 o'clock. He paused. "I'm broke. Sabrina. Not struggling. Not reduced. Broke. I have roughly $18. 0 inches. A personal checking account and a car." The sitting room was very quiet. Damien watched her face. For the span of perhaps 3 seconds, something moved behind Sabrina's amber eyes. Something quick and clinical, like a calculation being run at speed. Her gaze moved around the room, the original oil painting above the fireplace, the bronze sculpture on the credenza, the crystal barware on the drinks cart in a sweep so fast that most people would have missed it entirely. Damien didn't miss it. "Frotzen," she repeated. The word sat in the air between them like a verdict. "Everything." "What about the Cayman structures?" she asked. Too quickly, too specifically. "Gone," Damien said, watching her carefully. "All of it." Sabrina was quiet for a long moment. Then she smoothed her expression into something gentle and reached across the cushion toward him. Her hand covered his. "We'll figure this out," she said. Her voice was warm, practiced, together. But her hand was cold. Marguerite Odom had worked in domestic service for 22 years. She had cleaned houses for a state senator, a professional athlete, 2 corporate attorneys, and 1 man who had later been arrested for securities fraud. She had seen everything and mentioned none of it to anyone. At 53, she was a heavy-set woman with a wide, honest face. Reading glasses she kept on a beaded chain around her neck, and feet that had been swollen for so long she thought of it as their natural state. She wore sensible dark shoes, a navy uniform, and kept her natural hair pinned back under a small white headband. Marguerite had been Damien Hargrove's head housekeeper for 3 years. She managed 4 other staff members, maintained a residence the size of a small hotel, and accomplished all of it with a quietness so complete that the family forgot she existed the moment she left a room. This was, in her experience, the most useful quality a person in her position could have. People stopped performing when they forgot you were there. On the evening of Damien's staged announcement, Marguerite was in the master bedroom's walk-in dressing room, methodically cataloguing the seasonal rotation of his suits, moving the lighter weight wool to the back, bringing the heavier fall fabrics forward, checking buttons, noting anything requiring tailoring. The dressing room was a long cedar-lined corridor with a pocket door that sat open a half-inch. Through it, she could hear the quiet sounds of the rest of the suite. She heard Sabrina's heels first, a fast, purposeful rhythm, entirely different from her usual measured walk. Marguerite went still behind the rack of hanging suits. She heard the bedroom door close, then the bolt slide home, then the distinct sound of a drawer being opened, the small lacquered Japanese chest that Sabrina kept on her vanity, and which Marguerite had always been asked not to move when she dusted. Then a voice, Sabrina's voice, but stripped of every quality Marguerite associated with it. Gone was the warmth, the measured control, the careful elegance. What replaced it was flat and efficient. "It's me. The test is confirmed." He deployed it tonight. A pause. He told me he was completely liquidated. Federal seizure. The whole narrative. He's good. But your asset inside the vault already pulled the account architecture 3 days ago. We know about the Liechtenstein holding trust. We know it's a blind structure, requiring dual biometric authorization for any transfer event. Marguerite's hand found a jacket sleeve and gripped it. She did not move. "I'm not walking away from this, Marcus. If I walk now, I get nothing. If I stay, I pass his test. He trusts me completely, and the wedding goes forward. Once I'm his legally designated next of kin and proxy holder, the blind trust releases automatically to me if something happens to him before the restructuring completes. We've been over this. The numbers are $94 million. Marguerite heard a male voice through the phone, low, unhurried. "The cardiac glycoside." Sabrina said, "I've been introducing it in his evening green tea. His doctor already thinks it's stress-related arrhythmia. Tonight I give him a concentrated dose. The autopsy will confirm a heart attack consistent with his documented cardiac stress markers. There's no signature on this. Marcus. It's clean." Marguerite released the jacket sleeve very slowly. She pressed her back flat against the cedar wall of the dressing room and stared at the low-watt light overhead and thought very carefully about what she had just heard. Cardiac glycoside. She knew the word. She had a brother-in-law who was a pharmacist, naturally occurring in certain plants. Das delice. Capable. Insufficient concentration. Of triggering a fatal cardiac event that looked entirely natural. It was the kind of thing that worked precisely because it was invisible, just like her. Sabrina's heels crossed the bedroom floor, paused, and then moved back toward the sitting room. The bolt slid back. The door opened and closed. Marguerite stood alone in the dressing room for approximately 90 seconds. Her heart was hammering in a way she hadn't felt since the time she'd found an intruder in a previous employer's garage. Her knees ached. Her feet hurt. She was 53 years old and had no business being involved in any of this. She thought about Damien Hargrove. He was a dangerous man. She was not naive about what his company actually moved or where his money actually came from. You didn't work in a house like this without understanding, eventually, what the silence was protecting. But he had also, without exception, treated Marguerite with the same straightforward respect he gave his attorneys. He had paid for an emergency dental procedure for her last year, out of pocket because her insurance denied the claim. And he had done it the same day. She mentioned it without making it into a moment. He had never said a word about it to her afterward. He had simply solved the problem and moved on. She thought about what was in that green tea. She moved. Marguerite came out of the dressing room and made her way through the master suite and down the servants' staircase at a pace her knees loudly objected to. She went to the kitchen. The large commercial kitchen was empty at this hour. The evening service staff had left at 9. The kettle on the countertop was still warm. Damien's evening tea service was set up on the marble island, a Japanese cast-iron pot, a cup without a handle, and a small unlabeled glass bottle she had never seen before tonight. She picked up the bottle, a small amount of clear liquid sloshed inside. No label. She uncorked it, dipped the tip of her index finger at the very rim, and touched it to her tongue. Nothing. No taste whatsoever. Which was exactly what she had expected. She had the bottle in the pocket of her uniform apron when she heard footsteps in the hallway. She dropped her hands to the counter and gripped it as Damien walked into the kitchen. He looked genuinely exhausted, not the performed exhaustion of the sitting room, but something older and realer behind his eyes. He stopped when he saw her. Marguerite. He blinked. It's almost 11. Why are you still here? I was finishing the seasonal wardrobe rotation, she said. Her voice was steady. This surprised her. He studied her face for a moment. He was very good at reading people. She had always known that about him, and she could feel him doing it now. You look pale, he said. Mr. Hargrove, Marguerite said. I need to ask you not to drink the tea tonight. The kitchen was very still. Damien's expression changed. Not dramatically a tightening, a repositioning, like a camera lens finding its focus. The tired man she had just seen receded, and something much more precise occupied his face instead. Explain, he said quietly. Marguerite reached into her apron and placed the glass bottle on the island between them. I heard her on the phone, Marguerite said. In the dressing room. She was talking to someone named Marcus. She knows about the blind trust in Liechtenstein. She knows it's a test. She paused. She said she's been putting something into your tea for several days. She said tonight's dose would be the last one. She called it a cardiac glycoside. Damien did not look at the bottle. He looked at her. She said. Marguerite continued. Because she had decided to say all of it, and stopping now would be worse than starting. That as your legal proxy and next of kin. If you died, before the assets returned to the primary structure, she would inherit control of the blind trust, directly. $94 million. The number sat between them, in the bright kitchen light. Why are you telling me this? Damien asked. Not suspiciously, genuinely, as if the answer mattered to him. Marguerite thought about it. Last year, she said. My insurance denied a procedure. It was the same week my sister's youngest was in the hospital, and I hadn't slept properly in 10 days. I mentioned it once, in passing. You paid for it that afternoon. You didn't announce it. You didn't ask for anything. She looked at the bottle. I'm not going to watch someone put you in the ground over $94 million. Damien was quiet for 3 full seconds. Then he picked up the bottle, tucked it into his jacket pocket, and took out his phone. He sent a text one line. No punctuation. He put the phone away. I need you to do something for me. He said, go to the server room in the basement. The door code is the same sequence I showed you for the fire protocol last year. Lock the door from inside. Do not open it for anyone except me. Can you do that? Yes. Marguerite said, good. He straightened his jacket. For a moment, standing in the harsh overhead light of the kitchen, he looked exactly like what he was, a man who had spent 2 decades at war, who had survived things she would never know the details of, who had built something massive and brutal and was now walking back into it with a calm so absolute it was almost serene. What are you going to do? She asked. I'm going to go drink my tea. Damien Hargrove said. Sabrina was in the sitting room when he came back. She had arranged herself with great care, relaxed posture, reading glasses on. The book open to a page she clearly hadn't been reading. The Japanese tea service had been moved from the kitchen island to the side table beside the sofa. The cast iron pot, the handleless cup, filled and steaming. There you are, she said, warmly. I made your tea. Sit down. You need to rest. Damien sat beside her. He looked at the cup. My chest has been so tight this week, he said. He pressed a fist against his sternum. And my hands. This strange numbness. Something moved in Sabrina's amber eyes. A flicker of satisfaction. Suppressed instantly. The tea will help, she said. Drink. He lifted the cup, brought it to his lips, let the steam rise against his face, and then his arm convulsed a sudden, violent muscle spasm, and the cup left his hand and struck the edge of the mahogany coffee table. The tea spread across the antique wood and dripped onto the rug in a slow, spreading stain. Damien Sabrina recoiled from the splash. He grabbed his chest with both hands and slid sideways off the sofa, his shoulder hitting the rug hard, his breath coming in short. Ragged pulls. He made the sounds of a man whose heart was seizing a choked gasp, a low moan, and let his body go slack. He had learned the meditation technique from an Icelandic combat medic 11 years ago. Slow the breath. Slow the pulse. Simulate unconsciousness with enough accuracy to survive a field interrogation. He had used it twice in genuine emergencies. This was the 3rd time Sabrina stood over him. She did not call out. She did not reach for her phone to dial emergency services. She stood with her arms crossed over the dark plum silk and watched him with an expression of cool, clinical assessment. She was checking her work. It's all right, she said softly. To the still room. Or perhaps to herself. It's easier this way. She waited, perhaps 90 seconds. Then she knelt beside him and pressed 2 fingers to his neck. Damien kept his pulse at 42 beats per minute. Slow and fading feeling. Sabrina stood up, satisfied. She pulled a phone from the pocket of her loungewear. Marcus, she said. It's done. Come now. The vehicles arrived in 14 minutes. 3 black suburban SUVs. Headlights off. Rolling fast up the gravel drive. They came through the main gate, which Damien noted through his near-closed lids, had been left unlocked from inside, which meant Sabrina had been planning this precise sequence for some time. The vehicles parked in a rough crescent around the front entrance. Doors opened. Boots hit gravel. Marcus Del Rey walked into the sitting room, like a man who had already redecorated it in his mind. He was 38. Powerfully built. with the kind of deliberate physicality that came from decades of violence and the confidence of someone who had never yet faced consequences that outlasted him. He wore a black bomber jacket over a charcoal turtleneck and carried himself with the easy authority of a man who expected rooms to rearrange themselves around him. He was the operational chief of the Del Rey network, a rival syndicate that had been systematically trying to breach Hargrove's port access for 18 months. 4 of his men spread into the corners of the room. Rifles out, Marcus looked down at the figure on the floor and smiled. He walked over and delivered a deliberate kick to Damien's ribs. Damien absorbed it, filed it. Sabrina moved to Marcus's side. He slipped an arm around her waist and pulled her in, perfectly executed. He said, kissing her temple, exactly as planned. He made it easy. Sabrina said, resting her head briefly on his shoulder. At the end, he was actually crying about starting over. It was exhausting. The Liechtenstein structure, Marcus said, producing a tablet from inside his jacket. My asset has already penetrated the outer firewall of the vault. Once you execute the biometric proxy transfer voice print and fingerprint, the blind trust releases into my Cayman accounts. Then we move him to the bay. And by sunrise, I'm sitting in his chair. Sabrina reached for the tablet. What about me? She asked. Lightly. You'll be right beside me. Marcus said. That, said a voice from the floor, is the most optimistic thing I've heard all week. The tablet hit the carpet. Sabrina stumbled backward into the credenza, sending the bronze sculpture crashing to the floor. Marcus Spoon. His hand going for the weapon at his hip, Damien Hargrove rose from the Persian rug. He rose without hurry. He straightened his jacket, rolled his left shoulder once, and looked at Marcus Del Rey with the patient, undivided attention of a man with nowhere else to be and no particular concern about how the next 60 seconds resolved. His face contained no anger, no pain, no theater, just the absolute zero of someone who had already made every necessary decision. How? Marcus said. He spilled the tea. Damien said simply. He reached into his breast pocket and set the glass bottle on the coffee table between them. Cardiac glycoside. It's a tidy method. I'll give you that. Marcus recovered. His jaw hardened. He snapped his fingers at his men. Put him down. All of you. Every rifle in the room clicked uselessly. For a half second, nobody moved. Then the lights in the corners of the sitting room shifted, and the men who had been standing in them were no longer the men who had arrived with Marcus. They were Damien's people, in identical jackets, holding weapons that had been swapped during the 14 minutes it had taken the Suburbans to travel up the drive. From the doorways, the hallway, the gallery above 31 of Damien's operators materialized. Laser sights, blooming red across every surface of the room. Marcus looked at his hands. The rifle was gone. He was holding nothing. Your asset, in my vault, Damien said, walking slowly forward. They'd attempted to access the blind trust 40 minutes ago. My system recognized the intrusion signature he'd touched our network once before. 8 months ago, we had a profile on him. The moment he connected tonight, we traced the source address, archived his entire operational ledger, and transferred his access point to a server that will spend the next 72 hours feeding him false data. Your syndicate's financial architecture is currently being mapped by my attorneys and 3 forensic accountants. By Monday, you won't be able to move a dollar. Marcus said nothing. The Liechtenstein structure was never a vulnerability. Damien continued. It was an invitation. I needed to know how deep your access went. Now I know. He stopped 6 feet from Marcus Delray. I also know about the 3 dock foremen you've been paying. The shipping manifest substitutions going back to March. The arrangement with the Port Authority inspector. Damien's voice was completely, conversationally calm. You've been very busy. Marcus. He turned to Sabrina. She had pressed herself against the far wall. Her composure had not collapsed into hysteria. She was too controlled for that. But the amber eyes were wide and fixed on him with an expression he had never seen on her before. Something that might, in someone less certain of herself, to be called fear. I passed your test, she said quietly. I didn't leave. You stayed to execute a proxy transfer and collect $94 million. Damien said, that's not loyalty. That's a longer con. He studied her for a moment. The chestnut hair, the composed face, the dark plum silk loungewear that probably cost $800. She was extraordinary. Really, the thoroughness of it. The patience. 18 months. There's a car outside, he said. One of mine. It will take you to a hotel. Your personal belongings, clothes, books. Anything you brought into this house will be at the front desk tomorrow morning. The ring stays. Sabrina touched her hand involuntarily. If you make contact with anyone connected to the Delray network, or attempt to access any financial instrument with my name on it, or set foot in the state of Virginia again, the recordings my legal team is currently reviewing will be transferred to the federal prosecutor's office. He paused. Do you understand what I'm telling you? She held his gaze for one more second. Then she looked away. 2 of his people escorted her from the room. Marcus Delray was taken, with his men, to a location that was not discussed in the sitting room. The matter of the dock foreman and the port inspector would be resolved through channels that left no paperwork. By Thursday of the following week, the Delray network's operational capacity in the region would be reduced to approximately 0 at 12:40 in the morning. Damien Hargrove went down to the basement server room and knocked twice on the steel door. A long pause. Then the sound of locks disengaging from inside. Marguerite opened the door a careful 3 inches and looked at him through the gap. It's over, he said. She opened the door the rest of the way and leaned against the frame. She was still in her uniform, her reading glasses slightly askew on their chain, her expression combining extreme relief with the particular exhaustion of someone who has spent 3 hours sitting on a folding chair in a room full of servers trying to stay very calm. Come up to the study, Damien said. He led her upstairs to his private office, a room she had dusted hundreds of times but had never been invited into. He went to the steel safe behind the bookcase and worked the combination, and he placed a sealed envelope on the desk in front of her. Mr. Hargrove, Marguerite said, looking at it without touching it. Inside that envelope is the deed to a 2-story house in Charlottesville, he said, fully owned. No mortgage. In your name. There is also documentation for a private trust. $3. 5 millions. Managed by my attorneys. Structured so that you receive a quarterly distribution for the rest of your life and the remainder passes to your estate. He paused. And I've arranged for your brother and his family to be moved out of the flood-prone property in Harrisburg and into a house in a proper neighborhood. That's already done. As of this morning. Marguerite stared at the envelope. I'm a housekeeper, she said. Not anymore. Damien said. You were the only person in this building tonight who acted out of loyalty to something other than money. My security team. My attorneys. My operators. They're all extremely good. They're also all extremely expensive. They do what they do because I pay them to do it. He stopped. You did what you did because 3 years ago I paid a dental bill without making it a performance. That's not an exchange. That's something else. Marguerite looked at him for a long moment. You carry a lot for one person, she said. It was not what he had expected her to say. I've been doing it a long time. Damien said, I know. She picked up the envelope carefully, as if it might be fragile. Thank you. Damien Hargrove took 2 crystal glasses from the shelf behind his desk and poured 2 fingers of a Speyside single malt that he opened on very rare occasions. He held 1 glass out to Marguerite Odom. No, he said quietly. Thank you. She took the glass. They stood in the private study in the middle of the night, on opposite sides of a very large desk that had never had anyone but him on either side of it. And they each took 1 slow, careful sip outside the windows of the manor house. The rain that had been threatening all evening finally came down.